So the night of the Netherfield ball is one of the most embarrassing of Elizabeth Bennet's entire life. There you have Kitty and Lydia running after officers, her mom speaking loudly of Jane's impending marriage, and then there's of course Mr. Collins over there being Mr. Collins. However, on top of it all, Mary approaches the piano. Elizabeth could not be more embarrassed, but why? Exactly what is embarrassing about Mary playing the piano at the Netherfield ball, and what does it teach us about Regency era ideals for women? That is what we're going to be talking about here in today's video. My name is Ellie Dashwood, and this is my channel where we talk about history and literature. If you like either of those things, please subscribe. Okay, it is the night of the Netherfield ball, and Elizabeth is watching Mary play the piano. How do we know this was actually an embarrassment to her family? How do we know that Lizzie's not just rogue over there being like, oh, there's Mary playing the piano again, how embarrassing, and then nobody else cares? I will tell you. I will tell you because Elizabeth is not the only one who finds this embarrassing. Let us read what the book says. Elizabeth was in agonies. She looked at Jane to see how she bore it, but Jane was very composedly talking to Mr. Bingley. She looked at his two sisters and saw them making signs of derision at each other, and at Darcy, who continued, however, impenetrably grave. That's right, Elizabeth is in agonies, Jane is pretending not to hear it, the Bingley sisters are laughing, Mr. Darcy, you can't really read the guy, but I will tell you whatever's going on in Mr. Darcy's head, it's not good. However, we even see Mr. Bennet understand that what's happening should not be happening, and in his very clumsy way, try to put a stop to it. But exactly why? Why is everybody reacting like this? Is it simply the fact that Mary's not very good at the piano? Well, that is definitely a factor. The book says, Mary's powers were by no means fitted for such a display. Her voice was weak and her manner affected. So there we have Mary, who, despite all of her practice and all of her desires to be good at playing and singing, she's just not. And that is, of course, an aspect of what's embarrassing about this, but it is really just scratching the surface a little bit, because there's a much, much deeper issue at play in this scene. And we get a hint of what it is in Mr. Darcy's letter to Elizabeth. So when he writes that letter at Rosings, he says this about Elizabeth's family. The situation of your mother's family, though objectionable, was nothing in comparison of that total want of propriety, so frequently, so almost uniformly betrayed by herself, by your 3 younger sisters, and occasionally even by your father. Pardon me, it pains me to offend you. I will only say, farther, that from what passed that evening, my opinion of all parties was confirmed, and every inducement heightened, which could have led me before to preserve my friend from what I esteemed a most unhappy connection. So here we see Mr. Darcy listing out the many, many faults of Elizabeth's family, and it's fascinating because of her younger sisters, he says that all 3 of them have a total want of propriety or proper behavior. Now, it's interesting that he does make an exception for Mr. Bennet, the dad, right? He's like, he only sometimes has a total lack of propriety, but your younger sisters and your mother have a total want of it. Because even modern readers pretty much understand why Mrs. Bennet is being frowned upon, or the wild giddiness of Lydia and Kitty are being called out here. But some may wonder, what did Mary do to be labeled needing more propriety? Why is she described as having a total lack of proper behavior? And Mr. Darcy says that his opinion of all of her younger sisters was confirmed at the Netherfield ball. So that means Mary did something at the Netherfield ball that proved to him that she had no clue how to properly act. What was that? It was the piano playing. But how on earth is playing the piano a lack of propriety? Well, To understand that, let's dive into what propriety was. So propriety in the most basic terms is proper conduct. However, if we want it in some very flowery 19th century terms, an author put it this way: propriety of deportment is a happy union of the moral and the graceful. It is to propriety, its justice and attractions, that we owe all the charm of being able to live in society. If politeness is necessary in general, it is not less so in particular cases. Neither rank, talents, fortune, or beauty can dispense with this amenity of manners, nor can anything inspire regard or love without that graceful affability, that mild dignity, that elegant simplicity. So here we see propriety being described as a combination of proper morals and proper gracefulness. And these are two essential elements for everybody. It does not matter your station or how much money you have. Now, what does that even mean though? What is proper gracefulness? Well, before we dive into that, I first want to tell you about this video's partner, Foreo. So I'm sure you guys remember that I've been loving the Foreo FAQ 202 face mask for a while now, and it's really become one of the best parts of my morning routine. Here's what I do. First, I take a shower, and then I slip on my face mask, which is easy to do because it is lightweight and wireless. Then I go into the FAQ app, and I select the anti-wrinkle treatment that runs for about 15 minutes and uses 4 different wavelengths of light to address some of my top skin concerns like fine lines and wrinkles. And then I take that time as it is running to sort of just rest and recharge my brain. I really like to meditate, or I grab one of my latest books and I just start reading. And this face mask is so comfortable to wear and is made of flexible silicone. I really do love this routine and do it a few times a week and always look forward to it, where I can both take care of my skin, which always looks so much healthier and vibrant afterwards, and also sort of take a moment for my mental health. So if you would like to add this to your morning routine, definitely check out the FAQ 202 and other Foreo bestsellers. Click the link in the description and use my code 30PRIDE for an extra 30% off almost all Foreo products. And this code is also stackable on already discounted products, so definitely click the link in the description and check it out. Now, back to the video. So the first requirement of propriety is proper gracefulness. How is Mary doing at this? What does this even mean? Well, first of all, in the era, gracefulness was defined as elegance of manner, dignity with beauty. That is true. You should have elegant manners, have this dignity that gives off beauty. How is Mary doing at this? Well, here is how Pride and Prejudice describes her. Mary had neither genius nor taste, and though vanity had given her application, it had given her likewise a pedantic air and conceited manner, which would have injured a higher degree of excellence than she had reached. Elizabeth, easy and unaffected, had been listened to with much more pleasure, though not playing half so well, and Mary, at the end of a long concerto, was glad to purchase praise and gratitude by Scotch and Irish airs at the request of her younger sisters. She is here described as being vain and conceited and pedantic, and later in the book we also hear her described as affected, which, if you've seen my video on things to know before reading Pride and Prejudice, affected was the Regency era way to say fake. Basically, it was like, you are fake. And that was one of the worst insults a young lady could have with regard to her manners. So overall, Mary was not seen in this era as having those elegant, graceful, dignified manners. Then, of course, we see her also described as not having genius nor taste. Now, of course, when it comes to taste, this was such an important requirement in the era. If you've seen my video on Regency Era Vacations, you know how important taste was, and Mary just does not have it. Meanwhile, she's being, again, compared to Elizabeth, who is easy, she's unaffected, and basically, while having less excellence at piano playing is coming across much more graceful with those elegant and dignified manners. So, already poor Mary is not doing great at this propriety thing when it comes to gracefulness. However, if you notice something else about these words that are being used to describe Mary, such as vain and pedantic and affected and conceited, they are not just an issue of manners. They're not just surface level problems. Rather, they go deep into the second requirement of propriety, which is morals. These are moral issues. So if we go back and revisit why Mary Bennet practices the piano so much, why does she want to be known as the most accomplished girl? Why does she jump at any chance to exhibit? It's because she wants attention. And this really helps us see why Mr. Darcy ties in all three of Elizabeth's sisters together. Because even though Kitty and Lydia are trying to be the center of attention in a different way than Mary, all three of them are trying to be the center of attention, which in the era was inherently immoral, especially for young ladies. Now you might be saying, Ellie, what are you talking about? I thought that playing the piano at parties was a requirement for young ladies. Isn't that how you show that you're accomplished? Isn't that your job? Don't we see heroines across all of Austen's novels playing at parties? Why is Mary the only one getting called out for this behavior? That is a great question. Let's dive into the etiquette around playing a piano at a party. So say you're a young lady at a party and someone has just asked you to play the piano. You need to do a moment of self-reflection. First, are you actually able to play the piano that well? And if they want you to sing, are you capable of singing well? Because it is only if you believe you can truly give your listeners pleasure that you should approach it. Otherwise, you should decline. Like if you know that, yeah, your mom has made you practice the piano for years and years, but you're really not good and no one's really going to enjoy listening to you, then you decline. Or something else you could do is keep the performance within your limitations. So here it points out that Mary had a weak voice. She should not be singing here. If she had stuck to only playing the piano, that would have been less worse than her attempt at playing the piano and singing. We see in Emma, when the heroine Emma is requested to play at the Coles, she does the self-assessment. Emma knew the limitations of her own powers too well to attempt more than she could perform with credit. She wanted neither taste nor spirit in the little things which are generally acceptable and could accompany her own voice well. So here we see Emma, who does struggle with a little bit of pride and vanity of her own, still able to do a credible assessment of her own skills. She did not bite off more than she could chew. She was like, I don't have that level of skill. I'm going to do what I do best. Now, it's also very interesting, though, that she has taste, and that is one of the things that allows her to do this. She can tastefully assess where her skill level is and what would be best suited to this occasion, where we clearly see that as something Mary lacks. So after you do that personal assessment of your own skill level, whether you should play at all, if you do perform, what you should perform, you also need to assess the earnestness of the petition for you to play. Is it for real? Do they really want you to play? Or was this a passing thought? Because a young lady would never want to appear impatient for display, because that was seen as a lack of humility. How is Mary doing at this? The infamous Netherfield ball reads this way. For when supper was over, singing was talked of, and Elizabeth had the mortification of seeing Mary, after a very little entreaty, preparing to oblige the company. By many significant looks and silent entreaties did she endeavor to prevent such a proof of complaisance. But in vain. Mary would not understand them. Such an opportunity of his exhibiting was delightful to her, and she began her song. So here we see Elizabeth's perspective on the scene, for she sees very little entreaty for Mary to play and sing. Basically, someone could have been like, oh, we should have some singing. Who would like to go? Mary, Miss Lucas, and then Mary's over there being like, yes, me, yes, I'm doing it now. Obviously not in those words, but in spirit, in action. Basically, a young lady was supposed to hold back a little bit. Make sure that no other young lady wanted to play. Make sure that the people really, really wanted her. And this was seen as a sign of basic propriety, modesty, humility. What they were not supposed to do was hear the slightest hint for them to play and then run up to the piano. So, for example, if we look again at Emma when she's at that party at the Coles, when they ask her to play and perform for them, here's what the book says. A little bustle in the room showed them that tea was over and the instrument in preparation, and at the same moment, Mr. Cole approaching to entreat Miss Woodhouse would do them the honor of trying it. Frank Churchill followed Mr. Cole to add his very pressing entreaties, and as, in every respect, it suited Emma best to lead, she gave a very proper complaisance. So we see here Emma requested to play at this party. However, it is first at the entreaty of the gentleman of the house, and then is added on to by further entreaties by Frank Churchill. Emma has received enough entreaties for her to play, for it to be proper, for her to agree to do so. Now, of course, for modern readers, this still might be kind of difficult to understand, right? It's like, okay, so Mary said yes really quickly to performing, and that somehow means she has a complete lack of proper behavior? Isn't that a little bit of, tiny etiquette point here? Is Mr. Darcy overreacting to the whole thing? Well, not in Regency eyes. Because you see, guys, one of the core moral foundations of a woman's entire identity in this era was supposed to be modesty. In fact, one author put it this way: the principal beauty and basis of the female character is modesty. I mean that modest reserve, that delicacy that retires from the public eye and is disconcerted even at being admired. It is of itself so beautiful as to be a charm to hearts insensible of every other charm, and has conquered when a fair face has been overlooked. Though art and nature shall conspire to render a woman beautiful, still, if she wear that appearance of boldness, it blots out every trace of beauty, and, like a cloud that shades the sun, intercepts the view of all that is amiable. So here we see modesty described as the basis of female character, and it is not just this one writer who thinks this. In fact, the concept of modesty in the era is quite complex, and we're going to delve into that more in a different video. However, one of the main facets of modesty was this humility, as we would think of it today. This humility that makes people not want to be the center of attention, that makes young ladies feel like kind of self-conscious and like overwhelmed when they walk into a ball and everyone's staring at them because clearly they're the most beautiful one there. It is that type of modesty that society really valued in women, the retiring from the public eye, or basically trying to stay out of the public eye. And so that is the core of female character, ideally. And here we see Mary having the opposite of that, right? She is impatient for display. Now, of course, you might wonder, why are young ladies becoming so accomplished if the main purpose is not to show off in front of everybody? Well, my friends, the Regency era had an answer for that too. Here's what an accomplished woman should have really been like. Her merit will be known and acknowledged by all who come near enough to discern, and have taste enough to distinguish. It will be understood and admired by the man whose happiness she is one day to make, whose family she is to govern, and whose children she is to educate. He will not seek for her in the haunts of dissipation, for he knows he shall not find her there, but he will seek for her in the bosom of retirement, in the practice of every domestic virtue, in the exercise of every amiable accomplishment, exerted in the shade, to enliven retirement, to heighten the endearing pleasures of social intercourse, and to embellish the narrow circles of family delights. To this amiable purpose, a truly good and well-educated young lady will dedicate the more elegant accomplishments, instead of exhibiting them to attract admiration and depress inferiority. So here we see this Regency era accomplished young lady with that proper degree of modesty. She's not out there showing off all of her accomplishments for admiration or to make other people, realize they're kind of inferior to her. Rather, it is for the happiness of herself, her future husband, her family, their cozy little parties they have at their home. That is the real purpose of a lady's accomplishments. And I think we have a perfect example of this in Emma with Jane Fairfax. She is highly accomplished, but she uses those accomplishments very modestly to bring happiness to others. So, for example, when she's invited over to the Woodhouses for dinner, she does help entertain them with music, and that is something that Mr. Knightley truly enjoys. He is one of those men who can see the value of Jane's accomplishments. So, for example, the book says, "A very pleasant evening, particularly pleasant. You and Miss Fairfax gave us some very good music. I do not know a more luxurious state, sir, than sitting at one's ease to be entertained a whole evening by two such young women, sometimes with music and sometimes with conversation. I am sure Miss Fairfax must have found the evening pleasant, Emma. You left nothing undone. I was glad you made her play so much, for having no instrument at her grandmother's, it must have been a real indulgence." So here we see Jane Fairfax in this ideal little role here. She is at the small dinner party. She's one of the few young ladies capable of playing, meaning if they're going to have music that night, it's up to her and Emma to make that happen. And we see Mr. Knightley say that Emma made her play. So we are sure that Jane was receiving proper enough entreaties to actually step forward and play, and it did give Mr. Knightley a great deal of pleasure. He was like, this was the best thing ever. We also see this idea that a young lady's full worth is not just out there for public display. Rather, it takes time for someone to truly get to know her, see all of her accomplishments, see all of her abilities, because she's not out there publishing them abroad herself. And we see a perfect example of this in Persuasion. So Anne in Persuasion really aces this Regency era ideal of the modest woman, right? She has a lot of talent. She has a lot of accomplishments, but she does not use them to attract admiration or be the center of attention. Rather, when we see her playing the piano, it's so that other people can enjoy dancing. And it's really Anne's ideal modesty that leads her cousin, the terrible Mr. Elliot, to say this of her: "I have not had the pleasure of visiting in Camden Place so long without knowing something of Miss Anne Elliot, and I do regard her as one who is too modest for the world in general to be aware of half her accomplishments, and too highly accomplished for modesty to be natural in any other woman." So here we see Mr. Elliot describing that ideal modesty that requires someone to get to know a lady for a long time before they start uncovering all of these accomplishments. Because she's not out there displaying them, showing them off. Rather, it takes a deep relationship to understand a modest woman's worth. Now, we see something very similar described over in Frances Burney's Evelina. So if you're not familiar with Evelina, I have a very old video going into this book. It was by one of Jane Austen's favorite authors. However, in it, there is the main heroine, Evelina, and she is described this way. "She is not, indeed, like most modern young ladies, to be known in half an hour. Her modest worth and fearful excellence require both time and encouragement to show themselves. She does not, beautiful as she is, seize the soul by surprise, but with more dangerous fascination, she stills it almost imperceptibly." So here we see Evelina being contrasted with other young ladies. They try to show off as soon as possible. They are known within the first half hour of meeting them, where Evelina's true worth takes time to discover, which really makes her this ideal of feminine modesty. However, this does take us all back to our original issue of Mary Bennet and the piano. So for Regency readers, the issue of Mary Bennet and the piano was not a small one of etiquette, but went to the very core of Regency era ideals around women, and how they should be modest and not want the limelight and not be impatient for display. Basically, this was a core character trait flaw according to the Regency era. And this is what really makes Mr. Darcy think that she has a total lack of propriety and has her lumped in with Lydia and Kitty, who again have this total failure of modesty, just in a different way than Mary. However, of course, we know Mary Bennet is very young and has a lot of growing up to do, and I'm sure will improve over time. Let me know in the comments down below. If you lived in the Regency era, how would you be doing at this? If you were highly accomplished in the piano, could you resist the opportunity to jump for a chance to play? Or would you just never want to play in public anyway because of anxiety? Let me know in the comments down below. And special shout out to my channel members. Hi! And as always, guys, keep being awesome, because you're awesome.